All right, so here we are, 152, and today we're down to analysis methodology, and then we go into 3 whole lectures about Microsoft Windows, the registry, and many other files, because Windows is the most important system you study, and there's just an awful lot of artifacts in Windows that you should be familiar with. But here we've got general analysis methodology, which is really just sort of how you perform an investigation. All right, let's see, I'm going to try and make this, I think, not quite all the way is better. All right, so when you do an investigation, you define your objectives. You don't just investigate to see what you'll find. You try to define what you're trying to find, then find the relevant data, convert it, analyze it somehow, and then evaluate the results to see if you have answered your questions. All right, so defining your objectives. This is something that I had to get used to, and I first came across it in a big way when I learned fiber optics and fiber optic splicing and all this jazz and fiber optic network design. And they said, when you set up fiber optics for a client, you will have to educate your client. And that's a big issue in all these high-tech fields. Your client is doing something like running a hospital, and they want, all the doctors to be able to get to the data everywhere quickly, but they don't really know the technology or the terms or anything. And so they can't really tell you what they want to buy. They have to sort of describe to you what you want, and you have to say, well, you could buy this, or you could buy that, or I could set it up this way. And you have to sort of educate them what the alternatives are and how to do it. And that's the issue here. Your managers and the people in charge of the investigation probably don't really entirely understand the technical difficulty of doing the analysis. So you have to sort of educate them and negotiate with them. So find out, what do you need to know? Can I figure that out? How long will it take? Because they might say something like, well, go through every machine and make sure there's no malware on any machine. And you have to say, that's not possible, and even getting close to that would take forever. We need to lower the scope. This is like saying, well, I want my server to be up 100% of the time. We say, no, that's nothing on earth can do that. The most you can get is like 4 nines or 5 nines, and you have to accept some downtime. Anyway, so figure out what resources you need, what your client wants, and what they're trying to get. So you can figure out how to get their real goal accomplished, even though they may ask for things that you cannot do on the way there. So figure out who the real boss is, who the leadership is, make sure everybody knows who the leader is, so you don't have people just wandering off doing stupid things on your team. And that's experience helps too. And a big issue is proving a negative. This is why, for example, the fake audit of the election in Arizona was, we're just going to go through all these votes and look for something that looks fishy. And that is the kind of investigation that is unwise, unprofessional. And that's why, it's funny, they had any lawsuits saying there was no election fraud, but of course they can't say there was no election fraud. What they can say is, we could not find any evidence of any large-scale election fraud. That's all you can say. You cannot prove that something does not exist. It could always, like people say, how many of my students are cheating? I say, well, I don't know. Years ago, I used to catch some of them cheating, but for all I know, there's smart ones cheating, and I'm not catching them. I never will know. And that's the same thing. So anyway, none of your evidence is perfect. None of your audit trails are perfect. You don't really know that nothing bad happened. All you can say is, I didn't find evidence of it with this technique. So you have positive tools. Look for an indicator of compromise. State if you can find those. Then you can state an opinion, saying, I ran it with antivirus. I looked for the known likely infections, and in my opinion, it was not infected. You're allowed to have an expert opinion in court too, if you're an expert witness, and that's the only way. An expert witness is the only person that can do that. Other people in court can only say what they saw, but an expert witness can state an opinion and say, in my experience, after examining this machine, I believe it was not compromised. Which is something I can never prove absolutely, but you're allowed to have an opinion. And if you convince them to trust you enough, then the jury and the judge will accept that your opinion is likely to be true. So here's realistic questions. Is there an active file with this hash on the computer? That you can answer. So too vague. Look at something without saying what you're trying to find. That's not going to really get you anywhere. What's better is to look for email within a certain range with some specifications like Bob, and then hopefully some idea what you're looking for. And so we're talking to the people, you ask why until you find out what they're really trying to accomplish. Not their half-baked ideas of what technical steps might be necessary to get there, but what they're really trying to find out. And then you help them achieve their goals. Another thing this reminds me a lot of is a doctor dealing with a patient. Like, what is it you really want? Because you probably don't want to just do every healthy thing you could. So what are your actual goals here? All right. So your data. This is, of course, the technical part, which is the main thing we're talking about in this class. Understanding your data. Data is stored all over the place. This is why police departments have such a problem these days, because if you go to a crime scene, there are all these gadgets, and they seize them all and then send them to some forensic lab that tries to retrieve data from all those gadgets, and it's really not easy because there's so many weird gadgets with weird connectors, and you're probably going to have a really hard time extracting data from all those things. You got hard drives, external storage devices, virtual desktops these days. You have to get that from the cloud machine, from the cloud storage company. You got servers. You got physical servers in your racks. They often use external storage now, cloud storage, storage area networks, and so on. You got mobile devices. When I was mentioning, probably the biggest headache for people like police departments, because people will have old, obsolete, abandoned versions of mobile devices like PDAs and stuff, and you're going to have a really hard time finding the right connectors and software to get the data off them. But everybody has all these portable cameras and cell phones and every other crazy thing, and they've all got data on them. Another saving grace, by the way, is that you don't necessarily need to find all the data. Remember, this is why you got to define your goals. Like, you don't need to find everything. You just need to find enough to accomplish your goals. Like, what did the attack do and how do we get rid of it? So you got storage, media, USB drives, CDs, network attached storage, and storage area networks. You've got your network devices like firewalls, switches, and routers. Now, they contain information, but they typically contain no user data, of course. You don't actually store a Word document on them or anything, but they do have perhaps logs of what kind of network connections have been made, and that might be useful. This hit the press recently when Trump said he needed to see the routers because he's following Mike Lindell, who believes that there was some kind of network attack on the voting machines, but the people involved say the voting machines were not connected to the internet, which, if true, would seem to say that there can be nothing on the routers of the slightest importance, and the swing states he's trying to investigate are refusing to let him inspect the routers, and Trump was very upset about that. Now, I must say, if they were connected to the internet during the time of voting, possibly even before the time of voting, you could argue that there might be something on the routers that would be interesting. If the routers have a log of firewalls, more likely than routers, that have a log of who you've been connecting to, and in principle, you might find a connection there to like a command and control server or something, and that would indicate malware on the devices. It's not, people were mocking this as utterly insane, but there's, like most of the things Trump says, it's not as simple as 100% wrong. It's just kind of extreme and exaggerated, but there are certain scenarios in which you might actually find interesting information on those network devices that would be relevant to a compromise. So your cloud services like Dropbox and Google Drive have got data, and could be lots of stuff up there. A lot of people put everything in the cloud these days, and that means it's, for one thing, it's easy to get. If you have a court order, you send it to the cloud, so a police department or law enforcement or someone with a properly executed court order can get it, which is nice. Then you have backup devices. You really need backups these days for ransomware and for other network disasters, so it should be offsite backups somewhere, usually on tape or on a cloud service like Carbonite or Mozy. This was Giuliani. Remember, when Obama got in the White House, he tried to use his BlackBerry, and there was a years-long battle between him and the NSA or some government security agency, whether that BlackBerry was secure enough, and they tried to make him use a specially hardened military portable device instead of a consumer BlackBerry, but Trump just used the phone, and so did Giuliani. And so Giuliani got locked out of his phone and restored it from the normal backup on the normal iCloud system. And this, of course, is a highly questionable thing. Somebody with a high security clearance handling top secret information should not be using ordinary consumer devices and ordinary consumer backup solutions like iCloud. It's not secure enough. Yeah, so a documentary. Yeah, that's right, something else. Anyway, so, but that's what happened there. And as far as I know, Trump just kept using an ordinary iPhone all along, which is certainly not a best practice for someone with a high clearance. Anyway, so here's evidence. Once you get to a device, the operating system itself has data, and then there's applications, user data, and the network services. Now, the operating system has got a file system storing the data, and the operating system has information like running processes, network ports, and things like the Windows registry, and the Unix syslog, and Apple plist files, which are configuration files for applications on there, like the registry. Those are clues in the operating system, and they won't give you personal data, but they will give you when something was installed, when a program is run, and things like that. The file system is where you find the stored data, and we talked about this quite a bit. You've got allocation units, are the chunks of disk space that are used for a file, and then the active files are the files that are in use with a name in the directory and an owner and a date, and the deleted files no longer have that metadata, but the contents of theirs are still around until they get overwritten. You have timestamps. You have unallocated free space, which may contain residual data from previous files, but it's no longer connected to an entry in the directory. And you have slack, which is a little bit of data left over at the end of a file that might have a little bit of data left over from a previous file that filled the block more completely. And the partition tables separate your disk into regions that are used for different purposes. So each file system is different. NTFS has these data streams and timestamps. UFS has inodes used by Linux systems. HFS is the Mac, has these things called resource forks. And the old Windows system used for portable devices, now FAT, has this file allocation table. You typically see that on USB thumbsticks. And this is all very authoritative in this book, getting kind of old, but the excellent book from Brian Carrier. I taught a class from this and took a class on this, and this we really go deeply into reconstructing deleted, damaged files and exactly how they're stored and following NTFS data streams and all sorts of very detailed forensic analysis there. I haven't been going into that much anymore in my classes lately because the tools have gotten so good that you really don't need to do it manually that much anymore. Anyway, then there's the application-specific artifacts, which are the main thing you'll look for on cell phones. The emails from the email client and the chat program and the web server logs and so on, the internet browser cache and favorites and all that stuff. This is often the first place you go because it's directly what the user has been using and it records directly what they're doing. This is often the most easy to find actionable data if you want to find out what people have been doing. And that's the user data, spreadsheets, Word documents, whatever's in their documents and pictures folder and so on. And it might be on your own local storage on a laptop, but typically in a company you put it on a server so you won't lose it with your laptop. You have roaming profiles where all these folders that look like they're your personal folders are in fact stored on a server somewhere. And these days you have things like Office 365 and OneDrive where everything is always in the cloud anyway because more and more people want to access it on their phone, they want to access it on the go, and increasingly you don't really want it stored only on one physical object that you might not have with you. So then your network services, right? You have all the proxy servers, DHCP, DNS, storing records of what connections have been made, what addresses have been assigned to devices, what network traffic has been going by, what things were picked up by the IDS or IPS as potentially malicious traffic, and so on. That's what you're going to find there. All right, so once you've found some data, then your data is often difficult to use. It's often a big block of data like an image of a hard drive, or it's encrypted or compressed or encoded, and therefore you can't just use it in its original form. You have to process it somehow. Or often it's corrupted or stored in some strange way. So if somebody else provides you with data, like somebody hands you a thumb drive and say, I have the evidence here, that's evidence. You may not know exactly where it came from or exactly what it is, but it's evidence. And so you have to ask questions and make sure you find out what you can about what you've got and where it came from, and then analyze it to find out what good it is. Disk images can be encrypted. You might have a forensic image of the whole drive is the most perfect, or essentially a clone, which would copy probably only the active data, but it might include copying the empty blocks too, or a logical copy, which is definitely just the active data. Could be, so typically expert witness is the most common format, but you might have it in raw format or a virtual machine disk file. And you can convert any of those to any of the others with FTK Imager or Encase or any of the common forensic tools like the open source one, SleuthKit. So you can mount them directly in Linux now with DD or with E1 if you get the right library. So you can use either format. Your data may well be encoded. Here's some examples. This one here is base64 encoded. This one here is UU encoding, which is kind of similar to base64 and scrambling thing. This is the MD5 hash, which is an interesting thing to put here. In principle, the point of the MD5 hash is it's not supposed to be reversible. So if you hash something, you're not supposed to be able to find out the original text, but in practice you can through a process called hash cracking, which is fairly successful for MD5. So it's not normally considered a way to store data, but in a way it is. You like to store passwords and stuff. Anyway, the general principle here is your data may be encoded in some strange way and it may be hard to read. And this is, here's another example. If somebody actually stores a hex dump here with an address, a bunch of hex values, and then the ASCII, like you might get from Wireshark, then they didn't store this text contiguously, so this contains credit card numbers, but if you look for 16 digits in a row, you're not going to find it, because you have part of the credit card number here, and then all this junk in the way, and then the other part. So it does contain credit card numbers, but you won't find it with a simple tool like grep. You're going to need a more sophisticated search tool to find it. And this reminded me of what happened. Mike Lindell had his security thing to deal with his claim that the election had been hacked, and he kept claiming he had PCAPs, proving that there were network attacks on the voting machines. And he published a video, and I went through the video and saw what he was claiming were PCAPs, and I saw what they weren't PCAPs. And a real security expert went to that a security symposium that he had and sent it back. This is supposed to be the PCAP, and if you look at this thing, let me zoom in on it. This 27272C, 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 this is just plain ASCII. And if you just convert it back to ASCII, remember I did the same thing with the video he had with a couple pages of this. I did some. It just looks like this. All this is a voter roll of addresses and names in comma-separated values. This is not a packet capture at all, which is what he claimed it was. This is just names and addresses. This guy blacked out the names, but this is just Simon Rec Center, 700 Middleston Avenue, Philadelphia, PA. This is just ASCII text put in a hex viewer to make it look like something sophisticated. And by the way, you can lose your CISSP or other certifications for doing this. What's going on is Mike Lindell is rich and kind of insane, and he's found a bunch of crooked security experts who will pretend to do some security analysis and just throw junk up that looks complicated and tell him they're finding this voter fraud. And it's a shame. They're just exploiting this sick old man and taking his money and doing fraudulent activities that are not real security. And you can lose your certification for that. And by the way, I think you could be prosecuted for fraud. I mean, they are just exploiting him and dragging him along. This is like people that take your car into the shop and they tell you, oh, it needs this, it needs that, it needs that, and you could pay for a bunch of expensive repairs you don't need, hoping that you don't know enough about cars to realize you're just being ripped off. And that's what these security people are doing to Mike Lindell. So it's a shame. Anyway, oops, I lost my, hit the wrong button. Let me bring that back. It's mentioned specifically in the CISSP ethics clause. This is called FUD, Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt, where you take somebody and just scare them with some scary story and get them to buy a bunch of service from you that they don't need. And that's what's happening to Mike Lindell. Anyway, so you got times, dates, and such, and different conventions for it. Especially dates are a problem, and so you have to make sure you've converted them, and money in different currencies and all that jazz. So once you've converted the data to some standardized format so you can analyze it, then you can track things down. So if you're trying to find data theft, somebody's exfiltrating data from the network, then you can look for network traffic that's unusual, or host-based artifacts of data theft. Typically what you'll find is they've accumulated a bunch of files into a folder, zipped it, then sent it off in the network, then deleted all that, and you can often find that. You can look for a lot of traffic going out on a single day or traffic going to an unusual place. This is how Google caught the 2010 intrusion from China. They caught them stealing the data, sending large quantities of data back to China, and they said, who is sending stuff back to China? To a strange address that is not one of our places in China. That was how they got caught. So you got your logs will show suspicious things like failed logins or connections from devices that are on those lists we talked about last time of known malicious domain names or IP addresses, that sort of thing. And then you have host-based artifacts, users running at strange times, running strange programs, processing unusual amounts of data, connecting to things they don't normally connect to, running high CPU activities like data compression, using compression tools like WinRAR and WinZip and such. That's the thing. Other persistence mechanisms indicating persistent remote control things like run keys. And so you look for malware. And in order to get somewhere, you have to somehow narrow the search. So hopefully you have some information to narrow it down, like certain devices to look on, certain periods of time that are involved, certain files that are involved, general things. Get a list of all the automatically starting programs. Look for malware with a malware scanner, and then also by just making sure that all the system binaries are intact, that they have a known good hash. And that sort of thing to see if a machine has been compromised. But the problem is living off the land. They call them lol bins, living off the land binaries. You can do things with legitimate system tools, and then you will not find any modified files or malware on the box, but malicious activities are still happening. You're going to have to do something more subtle, like look at the lines of command lines that were executed and be able to recognize that those are malicious. So you might find cmd.exe in some other folder, which is suspicious. And, all right, so you make a plan, like search for abnormal user login times. That's something you can probably automate. And consider things like following how hard this is to do and how likely it is to answer your question before investing a lot of resource in a complicated search. Decide whether it looks like it's going to really work. And so you can choose your methods. You can use external resources, hire contractors, or use third-party tools like VirusTotal. You can manually inspect data in something like a hex editor, but you may want specialized forensic tools like SleuthKit. You want to sort and filter data to hopefully exclude most of it so you can focus on the suspicious part. And you might use statistical analysis to find data that is out of the ordinary. Keyword searching is very important. This is the most important tool you have usually. You have some keywords, you look for mentions of the keywords, and that leads you to emails and other relevant documents. And file and record carving are how you retrieve data from deleted files. So external resources, there's a couple of known libraries from NIST.gov and NSRL Look. These are places that have a list of all the known files. It's also built into forensic tools like Encase and FTK, so they can tell you if the files are known to be good versions of things, and that would save you a lot of time. You don't bother looking at any binaries that are on a list of a known legitimate binary. Then the presence of that file itself does not imply that anything has gone wrong. VirusTotal is, of course, the main one. Oh, I have a network error. I'll reload my player. Let's see if... Okay. It came back for me. I hope it came back for the students. Put it in the chat if you lose the connection. That was screwy. But anyway, VirusTotal is the standard. More and more powerful. They just added more features this week. It's extremely useful. Be aware, as you mentioned before. Good. Okay. If you upload a file, then they will inform other people that that file has been inspected. So you don't necessarily want to do that. That might tip off the attackers. But what you do is calculate the hash and search for the hash. And then you can see if there's a record of a file without letting anybody know that you found that file. So I got a nice demo. VirusTotal just added new features, and they had a blog where they demonstrated some features, and I thought it was fun to play with. So here's VirusTotal. And let me fit it on the screen. There we go. And if you wanted to, it's really nice. They wrote a blog referring to malware, and all I need to do is have the hash of the malware. And I think you can use any kind of hash you want, But what they gave me is SHA-256, which is probably the most perfect hash to use. All right, so I don't want to upload a file, and I don't want to use a URL. I just want to do a search. And so I just paste in this hash value and search. And now, because I logged in, I made a free account today, trying to get some of the advanced features, which I didn't really get. But I got this, crowdsourced Sigma rules. So they have some interesting data there. Detects the creation of an executable with a system process name in a suspicious folder. So here's some sort of behavioral marks. And here's the antivirus tools detecting it, and everybody's read. So this is something really nasty that everybody knows about. And if you go to behavior, is what I like best, behavior runs it in sandboxes and tells you what it did, which is awesome. And the new one they're proud of is the Microsoft sysinternals one, which runs it on Windows and runs sysmon to record the events, which is what we're using in the projects in this class. So it's really very nice. So it shows you it made a DNS resolution to this name. It wrote some files here, and notice this one. It made a file called svchost.exe in a temp folder. So that's exactly like what we were talking about in the earlier slides. It's svchost is a Windows system file. It should be in C Windows System 32. It has no business being here. So this is a file masquerading as a system file in the wrong folder. That's very suspicious, and you can see it right there. And here it's putting something in the startup menu. This is a auto start procedure. Now every time the machine starts up, it's going to run this exe with this long hash looking name. So that's a persistence technique, which is pretty awesome. And here's more persistent techniques. Here's run keys. In the registry, Windows current version run, it drops 2 run keys to run that malware again. So those will also launch it on startup. So this is pretty nice. It creates a process of svchost, which is certainly a fake one, not the real one. It runs netsh. And by the way, we're going to find out what netsh is for. What netsh is down here. This is where it uses the netsh command to open a firewall exception to let that fake svchost use the network. So this is really a lot of great information, and I didn't have to run the file anywhere. VirusTotal did it all for me for free. So it's really very nice. Anyway, and there's a lot more here. There's a bunch of these now. There's another one I've used before. I think it's this one here. The Juju box is pretty good too. Anyway, it's really very nice. So VirusTotal is awesome. And I got another one, which came from this blog here. This one here. Let's go back to VirusTotal and back to search and just search for this hash. Okay, and so it matches some protocol detection attempt. I don't really understand what that is. Then it has ransomware, apparently, and a Trojan. Once again, all the antivirus people know this is awful. If I go to behavior, here's some sandbox I didn't know about, C2AE, but let's use sysinternals. And so sysinternals shows the IP addresses it goes to, which, by the way, are local IP addresses, which is kind of screwy. It opens files. It deletes a bunch of files. And here it drops some files. And one thing that's interesting here is the files it drops into the recycle bin. It drops files that contain an email address. So I don't know why they would put an email address in a file name, but it does. And in the blog from Microsoft, or from VirusTotal, they said you could find other files that contained this information, other malware that contained this, but when I tried to do it, it didn't work for me. So I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, this is an interesting indicator of compromise. This email address apparently has something to do with this. And I don't really know what the deal is. Maybe if it's ransomware, that's where you have to contact to pay the ransom or something. Here it puts something in C sysmon, which is kind of disturbing. This is data collected from sysmon. If the ransomware is aware of sysmon, it might be messing with sysmon. That's the problem with dynamic analysis. You're running in a compromised system. You might be getting false data. Anyway, here's registry actions again. And again, it has some run keys to automatically make it run this thing called unstreamed. And again, here it goes, doing something to the firewall, like disabling the firewall or doing some kind of registry key that has to do with the firewall, presumably to allow the malware through. And here's shell commands. Here it is again, just disabling the firewall completely. Boy, this is pretty sloppy stuff. That's what my stuff I wrote for the projects did. And I was sort of ashamed of myself instead of just opening a port. But here's real ransomware doing the same thing. Just turning off the firewall. Now that's hitting it with a hammer. Anyway, and on you go. So then it injects processes like this one with a long hash-like name. And off you go. Here's Explorer launching those processes. Anyway, that's VirusTotal, more and more powerful than it ever has been in the past. Extremely useful and free. There's also some pay version where you get even more, which I've never used, but the free version is pretty awesome anyway. All right. So you can do a manual review of data if it's not too big, like a flash drive. What's the best way to continue with Microsoft Azure student account after the free month expires? That's a good question. I can get you like a $50 voucher from Microsoft. That's one pot. That only works as long as the class lasts. So probably the free will take you through the period of the class. After that, I think you have to pay. That's why I quit using it. I set up my own cloud. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a simple answer. Your teachers can get vouchers, but they're only like $50 of more service, which really doesn't go too far. That's the thing. Azure is not too generous. Google Cloud will give you more. Yeah, okay, I'll see if I can get some vouchers. Let me look into that, and I should be able to send it to everybody. I just have to fill out a form, and Microsoft is pretty fast about sending them. Oh, wait a minute now. You know, I think it's Google that gives me vouchers, not Microsoft. I'll check with Irvin. Irvin knows this stuff. Ask me again next week. Let me see. I'll make some progress on that, because I might be able to get you some vouchers. If not, I think you might not be able to get more free Azure service. Azure is great, but it's they're not too generous with the free service. Google is much more generous. Anyway, so you can search things manually, and it's good to know how to search things manually in a tool like HXD just to verify what you find. One important thing here is that all your tools have bugs. And of course, the criminals are constantly making nastier, sneakier stuff that confuses the tools. So if your tool tells you something is here, you can't really believe it entirely. It could be misunderstanding something. There was a guy that was actually taken to court, and the forensic analyst said this person had been viewing porn sites at school. And what happened is there was an anti-malware engine installed that had a list of URLs to block in the registry. And when he found that list of URLs, he thought those were URLs this person had gone to, but they were not. They were just known malicious URLs that were blocked. And that's the kind of thing that might happen if you use a tool. It might have something it finds that you misunderstand or the tool misunderstands. So you have to independently verify anything important with a second tool. And often the best thing to do is just use a plain hex editor to see what's exactly there. You can't trust any tool too far. And then there's data minimization. How do you, if you have thousands of files, how do you figure out which ones to look at? Well, you find some way to sort them and remove large categories of them that are not interesting. Like, for example, the timestamp is outside the range of interest, for example. That would be a nice thing if you know something happened within a certain period of time. And then if you don't have any clue what's going on, if you're just doing threat hunting to see if anything bad is happening, then you use statistical analysis to just see if you can find some anomaly. So you use a tool like Sawmill is a tool that will make graphs of things. So you look at traffic, and so something happened here, a large amount of traffic, and here, so that might indicate something happening that matters, and something happened here. The traffic fell to zero for a period of time. So those would be areas you might look at and see if you can find out what's going on there. And here you see the number of visitors. Again, there's this region of 0 visitors, so that downtime might indicate something happened. Here you can have graphing types of devices connecting, and maybe the unknown devices are some kind of scripts imitating a device, forgetting to put in a valid user agent or something. You know, this is the sort of thing you do. You can just graph traffic and try to find the abnormal ones. That's one way to get some place to start if you don't have anything else to start from. But typically, in a normal case, you do have some information. You have something brought this to mind, like a piece of stolen data was sent somewhere, and you know the names and addresses of the stolen data, for example, or you know something happened at a certain time, like a virus alert. You have some kind of lead, and then you have some strings. You have the name of the customer whose data was stolen, or the IP address something went to, or something. You have some kind of string, and so now you search for those strings. Then you read those and you find more clues and search for them. And when you reach the point where you're not finding any new keywords, then you're done. This is a process, general way to find what's reasonably easy to find and not waste too much time. Because, of course, you could spend forever on a case, but in practice, you don't need to find 100% of the data. That's impossible. You need to find, enough of the data to accomplish your goal. How to filter out time-stomped files? Well, if they're time-stomped sloppily, they might have a time that is, again, going to be out of the range. Like they might time-stomp them back to some really early time. If they're careful, smart people will time-stomp to a common time, and then it's really hard. Your only hope then would be that their time-stomping was sloppy. Microsoft Windows machines have like 4 different timestamps, There's MACE, modified, accessed, changed, and executed or something. There's like 4 timestamps, and a lot of timestamp tools don't change them all. So you can now detect that the times are wildly out of agreement. And there are some tools that will do that, although I'm not sure I remember the names of them. But those are ways. Other than that, you'd be looking for some other kind of clue. These are very good questions. All right, so you got unallocated blocks are parts of the disk that are not, or SSD that are not in current use, but they contain often leftover data from a deleted file. And then you have some bytes at the end of an active file that might have fragments of another file. And forensic suites will automatically try to recover these and let you search through them for keywords. You don't really have to do it manually anymore. But this is what's called file carving. File carving will look for file headers and file footers in the unallocated space. And what it usually does is it finds the start of a JPEG, and then someplace it finds the end of a JPEG, and just takes all the blocks in between and calls that the image, assuming it was not fragmented. It doesn't bother to follow the chunks inside there. So often when you have a reconstructed image, it will have weird stripes of junk in the middle of the image, but you can often still see it. So that's typically what it does. Foremost will do this in the command line on Unix. On Linux, you can install that, but this is what FTK and Encoding and everything will do automatically. They'll have recovered files. And, most of them recover and you can still open them. Quite a few of them are damaged. You only have fragments and you can't really open them like a Word document or anything, but you can still search for strings by text strings. But remember, anything recovered in this way no longer has an owner or a timestamp, so its value is less. But you can still get some information by reading it. It's like something from RAM. RAM has the same problem. Anything reconstructed from RAM has no owner and no timestamp. So it's not as good, but still there's some value in it. So then you evaluate results. You periodically evaluate, am I actually learning anything? Am I going down a blind alley, which is very easy? Are you really, very often you have to just stop and try another start, because whatever procedure you're using is just getting too difficult and getting nowhere, and you need to start over with a different procedure. And then at the end, you've got a result. You're going to have a report. You have the answer. Did this person commit the crime? What did the bad guy do? Did they really compromise this machine or not? That sort of thing. So I remember I did this. I was in the first Department of Defense bug bounty program, and it was all using this awful Windows program, .NET Nuke, and I didn't know anything about .NET at that time. So I ran a normal vuln scanner that told me there were 300 vulns in .NET Nuke, and I said, I really don't think so. Those were all false positives. So, this was a blind alley, and I didn't get any bounty from that one, but I was happy to participate in it anyway. And other people found good stuff and made bounties, and I just became aware of .NET Nuke, which I'd never heard of before, which they use greatly in the military for some unknown reason. They love .NET. Anyway, after that, I started adding .NET to my classes. So let's take a look at some Cahoots. And I taught the DEF CON workshop this year, and had some .NET stuff in there, and I was complaining about .NET, and a developer came up and tried to explain to me why .NET is great. Some people love .NET. And apparently what he told me is .NET is very good for like big mammoth projects with a bunch of developers in different locations all working together to make some giant thing. Yeah, I for small things, .NET just seems to be incredibly hard to use and overkill, but apparently for mammoth giant projects, it's valuable. That's what he told me. This happens to me a lot. I mean, I've only worked at small businesses and research. I don't really know that much about how big corporations do stuff. They use a lot of difficult tools that I haven't got much experience with. I'm working for them now, though. Now I'm working for 3 of the Fortune 50 as a consultant, and I'm learning a lot. So I certainly like the SANS rule that all your instructors should really be working in industry too. And that is increasingly true for me. Now I'm working for a lot of industry consulting contracts, and it certainly is very beneficial to my classes. I'm learning some of the big boy tools. Anyway. Well, I'll wait a few more seconds, but we might have only 4 competitors, which will increase your chance of success. All right. So which device doesn't have any user data? Yeah. Firewalls, like we say, they'll just have like IP addresses or something, but they're not going to have any user data. All right. Which one is the expert witness format? Yep, E01. All right, which format is for virtual machines? Yep, that's it. That's the VMware format, I think. All right. And which encoding uses uppercase, lowercase, and numbers? That's base 64. 64 characters, 26 uppercase letters, 26 lowercase, 10 digits, and then 2 more symbols like plus and slash. All right, and how do you reconstruct images by finding headers and footers? All right, that's file carving. All right, and here's the winners. All right, I think I know who that is. I certainly don't know who that is. And that, I think, is a real name. So Clayton's going to get his points. And I think I know who Jay is. Now I think if I remember who Jay is. So the only person who is not going to get points is localhost unless they come out of the closet. All right. So it's 6:58, 6:55. All right, let's take a break a 10-minute break until 7:05, and then I think I'll demonstrate the last Velociraptor. But I'll take a look when I get back and see what the most important project is. But I think there's another Velociraptor to be demonstrated. And hopefully I've got my private cloud working well enough that will be okay.